Come on.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday for Sunday, June 25th, 2023. We've got members of the media, academia, financial services, and government standing by as we break down and analyze all the news and events for the week. So sit back, relax, enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday.
The same old story. Oh, turn some pages.
Well, we're going to kick things off with a look at what is happening on Capitol Hill in terms of legislation, regulation, litigation, arbitration, mediation, consolidation, other Asians. Joining us on the line, you know them as the Legal Eagles. They're back together again. Again, we're uniters, not dividers here at BRN. David Levine, Kevin Walsh, both are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. The Legal Eagles. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, listeners. It's great to be on as we get into the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I want to start with you because I know we're going to talk about just the general topic of data breaches. So why don't you kick us off, and then I will get Kevin to kind of weigh in too.
Sure. Jumping right in out of the box, Jeff, is the discussion of data breaches. This past week, Assistant Secretary Gomez was cited as for a comment she made in a speech at the Department of Labor for recognizing the fact that breaches seem to happen almost every day. And the question that comes out of that is, what do you do about it? And to set the table a little bit here, regardless of whether you're a plan sponsor, plan fiduciary, service provider, data breaches are a fact of life and a reality. Who amongst us hasn't gotten one of those many letters offering us a year, 2, 3 of free credit monitoring because our data has been breached somewhere? And retirement is no exception to that rule. As we've discussed before, it does take a village to run retirement plans, from sponsors to fiduciaries to advisors, consultants, to the record keepers and TPAs, and then accountants and lawyers and everybody else. So the Department of Labor put out its best practice tips, and they're not legally binding, but they're the Department of Labor's tips as to how you do cybersecurity. And the reason we start with that is they're not binding, but the DOL asks you about them, and a lot of people use them as a framework. There's also the Spark Data Security Oversight Board kind of data security standards as well, and there's other standards. And the key is the fiduciary provider is twofold. Number one, under ERISA, you're supposed to have a prudent process. So in figuring out how people deal with data in terms of security, it's understanding what people do. You can't expect perfection. The federal government, even the system the Department of Labor uses for like document uploads, has been breached at times, the software. So the question is, what's your process for identifying notification, remediation? How do you approach that out of the box? That's piece number one. Number two, and this is something that gets negotiated all the time, what are the contractual relationships between the various parties having data, and what do they agree to do and not do in the case of a data breach? So given that landscape, we come back to the basics of prudence. And what is a prudent process here, and how do you approach it? And that's the real thing you do. You can stay up all night worrying about data security, and you want to be a good, prudent fiduciary, but at the same time, there's no one standard. It's about what is your process. So with that, I'll hand it over to my friend, Mr. Walsh, because I'm sure he has some further thoughts.
Yeah, David, I think that was a great point. You know, when we think about cybersecurity and we think about the ERISA space, the Labor Department's very focused on making sure that participants who are owed benefits receive those benefits. And they're also worried about, folks' personal information being stolen in a way that, then allows cyber fraudsters and hackers to, engage in identity theft. And if we think about it from a regulatory perspective, it's a whole lot tougher for DOL, the Labor Department, to go out and find these cyber fraudsters, to find these cyber criminals and say, and to stop them from doing what they're doing. So when we look at what we see the Labor Department doing, what we've seen kind of recently is they've been launching a fair amount of investigations into plan service providers and plan sponsors, asking them about their cybersecurity practices in an attempt to, get in front of the issue, and also to raise awareness among, plan sponsors and service providers that, plans protect valuable things on the internet. For a participant, their account balance is their retirement savings, and electronic distributions are important to participants. But if it's not secure, that's a vulnerability. So this is an area that's going to continue to evolve. I always talk about how I'd love to see clear guidance from the Labor Department, but when we talk about things like cybersecurity, where there is evolution, the guidance that we're likely to see is going to be process oriented, telling fiduciaries, telling service providers, not that you've got to do X, Y, or Z, but instead saying, what's important is that you survey the scene, figure out what other people are doing, take steps to prevent action. If something happens, you take steps to remediate that. So, while in general I'm a clarion for clear rules that are actionable, this is an area where I think we're going to see continued evolution in the near future and possibly longer.
And you guys both bring up a really good point, which is no data breach is the same. I mean, they're all using different tactics. Some may be done by smaller hacking groups. Some may be done by large hacking groups, like actually state-sponsored hacking groups. So I guess what's important, and I kind of tie this back to just managing data, managing privacy. It's as a plan sponsor, as a fiduciary, it's just being on your toes, properly asking the right questions of your partners during the initial contracting phase, but a continuation of that conversation with your partners. And when I'm partners, I mean your record keepers, all your service providers, right? It's the continuous conversation to make sure you understand what they're doing in response to what's just happening in general with breaches.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a great point. I mean, I think it's a continuous conversation. And, we've also got to be mindful that the retirement space is a balancing act where, we may be able to protect a participant's account perfectly. But if we were to do that, we would essentially be taking that account offline and making it inaccessible by the participant. We want to have in place cybersecurity practices, but if a participant experiences hardship and needs to take a loan or needs to take a distribution, we also need to make sure that folks can do that. And it puts the retirement system in a tougher spot than other industries in some ways, because, giving participants access to their money is really important here.
And David, they're adapting, they meaning the hackers. I mean, we just did a show with this with the Better Business Bureau this week. We've got another show tomorrow with Consumer Affairs. I mean, all different sorts of ways to get personal information, PII, some of which doesn't even come directly from the record keeper, the service provider. You may give that up as an individual, through these spoofing emails, right? I mean, there's just so much. It seems like needs to be some level of regulation, some level of legislation, but also personal accountability too. Sorry.
But to your point, Jeff, I think a couple pieces. You're right. It is a game of whack-a-mole. It is constantly evolving and changing, and we all know that. I think we all embrace that. But I think that also highlights why having a regulation or anything, it's still basic ERISA prudence. I'm going to disagree here, and I think I'm going to agree with my colleague, Mr. Walsh. I am wary of having the Department of Labor, who certainly has educated themselves, but they're not cybersecurity experts. They're not NIST. They're not the people who are the true experts in this area, saying what you need to do for cybersecurity when the rule that applies today could be different tomorrow, because like even the guidance on what you use for passports has changed dramatically in the past 5 years. Not passports, passwords has changed dramatically. Like now passkeys are rolling out broadly instead of passwords. The point I'm making is I think that we don't necessarily need regulation at this point, but I think people just need to focus on a prudent process. So I would disagree a little with you.
Yeah. And David, just to kind of do a capstone on this, or cap off this conversation, there's a lot going on at the state level too. And you guys often have talked about the carve out for employee benefits. To Kevin's point, you can't wall off participants you need some of that data to help get people to retirement. At the same time, you've got to balance that level of privacy. So employee benefits seem to be walled off in most of this state legislation.
It is often walled off, but not always, Jeff. And I think that's the other point, is each state has its own set of laws. And I was on a call with a record keeper and a plan sponsor client yesterday, and the record keeper was walking through how they deal with the different states. Each has a different approach, and there's no one wrong or right. So I am cautious before mandating some specific standard when there's a lot of good approaches that are out there.
Yeah, well, so suffice to say, gentlemen, this is going to be a continued topic of conversation. I put this right up there with the ESG and a conversation we've been having. It just continues to be iterative. And look, I'm glad we have you here to kind of help us break it down in the moment. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Thanks for bringing us on, Jeff, and thank you, listeners.
Bye, gentlemen. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you both. Bye-bye.
Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. And now we're going to take a look back at one of our recent interviews. This one with Senator Bill Cassidy discussing Social Security solvency. Let's give it a listen.
Senator Cassidy, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, this is great. And we're going to talk about Social Security. We're going to talk about retirement. But I guess I want to ask you, just there's so much going on in our country. Where does retirement sit as a priority for yourself, your colleagues in the U.S. Senate, and also those in the House of Representatives?
I can't speak for everybody. I can speak for myself. It is thought that 40 to 50% of boomers basically don't have a retirement plan. Our Social Security is their retirement plan. Now, that's just those who are only focused on Social Security. We know there's other pension funds which aren't doing well. Now, there's 10,000 boomers a day that become eligible for Social Security and Medicare. I only mention the number to show that the growth of those over 60 is quite outstanding in our society. And if they're not prepared for retirement, that's going to become a problem for all of society. I am really focused on the issue.
Yeah, and I know you've authored a lot of articles about this. You're really focused in on this. We received a disturbing report about the Social Security Trust Fund, and I want to get your reaction if I can. We'll talk about the solutions in a minute that you've suggested and have some ideas. But what is your reaction to that report? Because that, as you said, a lot of Americans rely on that benefit for their retirement.
It should be a wake-up call to the political establishment that this program, which 40 to 50% of Americans, it is their only retirement, that we need to do something. Now, Jeff, you kind of alluded to it, but the disturbing report is that the Social Security Trust Fund goes insolvent in 8 or 9 years. At that point, those currently receiving Social Security will get a 24% cut in what they are receiving. Okay, 40% of Americans, that's their only retirement, but it's going to get a 24% cut. That should be a wake-up call for everybody who's involved with this.
And just to follow up on that, Senator, I mean, this is obviously a very important issue. Let's talk about some of the possible solutions. And again, just referencing a recent article, op-ed that you wrote about solving Social Security. What are some of the ways to solve this? Obviously, cutting is not an ideal solution. We don't want that to happen. People are relying on this benefit. They were promised a benefit. So what are some ways around this? So some solutions, excuse me.
Well, Jeff, you teed it up nicely. Seniors should not have their benefits cut. They should not pay extra taxes. You shouldn't go after people who are in retirement. They've retired. But working with Angus King and others, we've come up with what we call the big idea. The big idea is to take $1.5 trillion, invest it in a trust fund separate from Social Security. No Social Security funds, no risk to the fund. A separate account, and let it grow over 70 to 75 years. Invest it in the strength of the U.S. economy, the greatest economy in the world, literally. Put it there, let it grow, and if you do that, you take care of 75% of the problem. Now, we need presidential leadership, political leadership to come up with the other 25%. There's some trade-offs here and there, but you don't take benefits away from seniors. But we need 25% more, and that's where we need political help, and so far we've gotten none of it.
So just to follow up on that, if I could, in terms of this separate trust fund, it would be invested. How far along in the legislative process? I mean, you're working with Senator King. Are we further along? Is it being considered by the other members of the U.S. Senate?
When the president in his State of the Union address began to kind of criticize Republicans for offering ideas on Social Security, singling out one or two, but really painting a broad brush. At a later point, one of my Democratic colleagues said, well, the president has just announced that he's running for re-election on the platform of doing nothing to Social Security. It's going to be difficult for us he won't sign it into law. What I was really being told is that since the president won't sign it into law, nothing we do matters right now. In fairness, Trump is saying the same sort of nonsense, that we don't have to worry about Social Security. It's okay. Social Security is not okay. And both of those men running for president should acknowledge that, and they should be constructive of saving the program.
Yeah, well, certainly the beneficiaries of Social Security might beg to differ. Yeah, well, here's to that, Senator. Senator, thank you so much for spending time. You've been very generous. And look, we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Thanks, Jeff.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line, and don't forget, for all the latest curated news and lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, and all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content, well, visit our website, and of course, all of our streaming partners. We're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN AM. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, Roll with the changes.